The courtroom buzzed with the usual low hum of activity, murmured voices, the shuffle of papers, and the occasional sharp rap of a gavel echoing down the hallways. Judge Michael Carter sat at his bench, flipping through the docket for the day. It was routine, predictable work, the kind he had done for over 2 decades. But as he scanned the name on the next case, he felt a strange flicker of unease he couldn't quite place. "Harris, Elena," the bailiff called, his voice carrying through the room. Michael glanced down at the file before him. Elena Harris, 12 years old. A child who had been through the foster system for 3 years, moved from one placement to another after losing her mother. Today's hearing was about concerns raised regarding her current placement. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom opened with a groan, and a small, wiry girl walked in. Elena was slight for her age, her dark, curly hair pulled into a loose ponytail. She wore an oversized sweater that seemed to swallow her frame. But what struck Michael most were her eyes, large, observant, and guarded, as if she had learned to scan every room for signs of danger or disappointment. Michael cleared his throat. "Good morning, Miss Harris," he said, his voice steady but kind. "I understand this case involves concerns about your current foster placement. Is that correct?" Elena nodded, her gaze meeting his briefly before darting away. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied, her tone firm, almost defiant. It was a voice too mature for a girl her age, one that spoke of years of having to defend herself. The social worker assigned to Elena's case began presenting her findings. Neglect in the current foster home. A lack of emotional support. Concerns over whether the placement was truly in Elena's best interest. Michael listened carefully, his eyes occasionally flicking to Elena, who sat silently at the table, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. When the social worker finished, Michael turned his attention back to the girl. "Miss Harris," he said, "you've been through a lot. Is there anything you'd like to say?" Elena hesitated, glancing at her social worker before standing. She was small but carried herself with an air of defiance, her shoulders squared as if daring anyone to challenge her. "Yes, Your Honor," she began, her voice steady. "I've been in the system for 3 years. I've lived in places where people only cared about the checks they got for taking me in. No one asked if I did my homework or if I even ate dinner. I'm tired of being passed around like I don't matter." Her words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. The courtroom fell silent. Michael felt a pang of something he hadn't experienced in years. Empathy? Guilt? He wasn't sure. "What do you want, Miss Harris?" he asked, his voice softer now. "What outcome are you hoping for today?" For the first time, her confidence faltered. She looked down, twisting the hem of her sweater in her hands. "I want a place where I belong," she said quietly. "Where someone actually cares." Michael's chest tightened at her words. He thought of his own childhood, growing up in a strict household where love was conditional and praise was rare. He had spent his entire adult life chasing stability and success, but now, sitting here, he wondered how much any of it really mattered. Before he could respond, Elena spoke again. "And I have questions," she said, her voice firmer now. "Questions about my mom. And about you." The statement caught Michael off guard. "About me?" he repeated, his brows furrowing. Elena nodded, her gaze locking onto his. "My mom used to talk about someone," she said. "She didn't say much, but she called him Mike. When I saw your name on the docket, I remembered." The courtroom seemed to freeze. Michael's mind raced, a name surfacing from the depths of his memory, Isabel. Memories of laughter, stolen moments, and a love that burned brightly but briefly flooded his thoughts. Could it be possible? Could this girl be his? Before he could process the implications, the social worker stepped in, her tone cautious. "Your Honor, perhaps we should focus on the matter of Elena's placement for now." Michael held up a hand, his eyes never leaving Elena's. "Miss Harris," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him, "we'll address your questions. But first, let's ensure your safety and well-being." Elena nodded, her expression unreadable. She sat back down, folding her arms tightly across her chest, but the unspoken words lingered in the air like a challenge. The rest of the hearing passed in a blur. Michael issued an order for a temporary placement review and scheduled a follow-up hearing. But as the courtroom emptied, He remained seated at the bench, staring at the closed file before him. Elena's words echoed in his mind. Asterisk questions about my mom. And about you'd asterisk. That evening, Michael sat alone in his quiet home. The walls, lined with bookshelves and certificates, felt stifling rather than comforting. He poured himself a glass of water and stood at the window, staring out at the city lights. Could it be true? Could Isabel have had a child he never knew about? Their relationship had ended abruptly all those years ago, driven apart by distance and misunderstandings. He had thought of her often, wondering what might have been, but never imagined this. Finally, he made a decision. Reaching for his phone, he dialed the number for Elena's social worker. When she answered, he spoke with a resolve he hadn't felt in years. Miss Carter, I need to arrange a paternity test. I have to know the truth. As the call ended, Michael felt a mix of fear and hope swirling within him. His carefully ordered world was beginning to unravel, but for the first time in years he felt alive. Whatever the outcome, he knew one thing for certain. His life would never be the same. The days after the courtroom encounter weighed heavily on Judge Michael Carter. Every spare moment was consumed by thoughts of Elena and the implications of her words. He spent his evenings poring over memories of his past with Isabel, trying to piece together the timeline and wondering how he could have missed such a profound connection. The paternity test had been scheduled promptly, and Michael knew that answers were coming. But the wait was excruciating, each passing day dragging on as his mind alternated between hope and guilt. Could Elena really be his daughter? And if so, what kind of father could he possibly be to a 12-year-old girl who had grown up without him? Elena sat across from Miss Carter, her social worker, in the waiting room of a testing facility. She swung her legs back and forth, the oversized chair making her look even smaller. Michael entered, his footsteps brisk but hesitant, and paused when he saw her. "Hi, Elena," he said, his voice gentle. Elena looked up, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Hi," she replied, her tone cautious. Michael nodded, taking the seat next to her. "Thank you for coming today. I know this isn't easy." She shrugged, leaning back in her chair. "It's not like I have much of a choice." Michael didn't respond immediately. He could feel the wall she had built around herself, high and fortified. "I just want you to know," he said finally, "no matter what happens, I'm here to help. To figure things out." Elena gave him a skeptical look but didn't reply. Miss Carter cleared her throat. "Let's get this done, shall we?" she said, standing and gesturing for them to follow. The process was quick but laden with tension. A technician swabbed Elena's cheek, explaining the steps in a calm and clinical manner. When it was Michael's turn, he followed the instructions in silence, his mind racing. Afterward, they left the facility together, the air between them awkward and heavy. As they walked toward the parking lot, Michael glanced down at Elena. "Are you hungry? Maybe we could grab lunch?" Elena hesitated, her brows furrowing. "Why?" she asked bluntly. Michael stopped walking, turning to face her. "Because I'd like to get to know you," he said simply. "If that's okay with you." For a moment she studied him, her expression unreadable. Then she shrugged. "Fine. But I get to pick where." They ended up at a small diner near the facility. Elena ordered a cheeseburger and fries, while Michael settled for a sandwich. The conversation started slow, Michael asking gentle questions about her school and hobbies, careful not to pry too deeply. "I like drawing," Elena admitted reluctantly after a while. "Buildings mostly. Mom used to say I could be an architect someday." Michael's chest tightened at the mention of Isabel. "Your mom sounds like she was really supportive," he said. Elena nodded, her expression softening slightly. "She was. Even when things got hard, she always made time for me." Michael smiled, though there was a pang of sadness behind it. "She must have been an incredible person." Elena's eyes flicked to him, curiosity mingling with suspicion. "You knew her, didn't you?" Michael set down his sandwich, meeting her gaze. "I did. A long time ago. She was important to me." "Then why weren't you there?" The question was sharp, almost accusatory. Michael hesitated, searching for the right words. "Things were complicated back then," he said carefully. "But I regret not staying in touch." If I had known about you. Elena cut him off. But you didn't, she said, her tone flat. You didn't know and now it's too late. Michael swallowed hard. I don't think it's too late, he said quietly. At least I hope it's not. Elena didn't respond, turning her attention back to her food. But the brief flash of emotion in her eyes told Michael she was listening, even if she wasn't ready to admit it. The following days were a whirlwind of preparation. Michael reached out to Miss Carter, expressing his interest in learning more about Elena's life and how he could support her. Miss Carter, though cautious, agreed to facilitate more interactions between them. She's a tough kid, Miss Carter said during a phone call. She's been let down a lot, so it'll take time for her to trust you. But she's also resilient. If you're consistent, I think you can make progress. I'll do whatever it takes, Michael replied. And he meant it. One afternoon, Michael invited Elena to visit his home. She arrived with Miss Carter, her expression wary as she stepped inside. The house was neat and understated, a reflection of Michael's solitary lifestyle. Elena wandered through the rooms, her footsteps echoing in the quiet space. It's nice, she said, her tone neutral. Michael chuckled nervously. I suppose it's a bit boring. But it could use a touch of creativity. Maybe you could help with that? Elena raised an eyebrow. Me? Why? Because you have an eye for design, Michael said, gesturing toward a small table where he had set up sketchbooks and pencils. I thought you might like a space to draw while you're here. Elena approached the table, running her fingers over the supplies. It's okay, I guess, she said, though the faintest hint of a smile tugged at her lips. As they spent more time together, Michael began to see glimpses of the bright, creative girl beneath Elena's guarded exterior. She talked more about her dreams of becoming an architect, sharing sketches of buildings she had drawn. Michael was genuinely impressed by her talent and made a point to encourage her. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Elena showed him a drawing of a futuristic skyscraper. Do you think I could really build something like this someday? She asked hesitantly. Michael studied the sketch, his expression serious. I don't think so, Elena, he said, pausing just long enough for her to frown. Then he smiled. I know you can. Her face lit up, and for the first time Michael felt like he was making progress. Thanks, she said softly, looking down at her drawing. The paternity test results arrived on a quiet Friday morning. Michael sat at his desk, the envelope in his hands. His fingers trembled as he opened it, scanning the contents until he found the confirmation he had been waiting for. Elena was his daughter. Relief, joy, and guilt washed over him all at once. He had a daughter. And now it was his responsibility to make up for the time they had lost. Later that day, Michael met with Elena and Miss Carter to share the news. As he handed her the results, he said, Elena, the test confirmed it. I'm your father. Elena stared at the paper, her expression unreadable. What happens now? She asked quietly. Michael leaned forward, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Now we figure this out together. I want to be a part of your life, Elena. If you'll let me. She didn't respond immediately, but eventually she nodded. Okay, she said softly. But don't mess it up. Michael smiled, his heart swelling with hope. I won't, he promised. And for the first time in years he felt like his life had found a new purpose. The weeks following their heartfelt moments together marked the beginning of a new chapter in Michael and Elena's relationship. Their bond, once tentative and fragile, began to solidify as trust slowly replaced suspicion. Michael was no longer just a figure of authority in Elena's life. He was becoming a father in every sense of the word. But as they navigated this new dynamic, they discovered that transformation required patience, resilience, and a willingness to confront the past. Michael sat in his chambers one afternoon, reviewing the final paperwork needed to secure Elena's permanent placement with him. The legal hurdles had been challenging, but his determination never wavered. The system's scrutiny was intense, with social workers conducting home visits, interviewing neighbors, and assessing his ability to provide a stable environment. For a man who had spent decades living alone, the process was overwhelming, but every signature and meeting brought him one step closer to giving Elena the home she deserved. When the final approval came through, Michael invited Elena to his chambers to share the news. She arrived after school, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her expression guarded as always. Miss Carter accompanied her, offering a reassuring smile. Michael rose from his desk, holding an official-looking document. "Elena," he began, his voice steady, "it's official. You're coming to live with me permanently." For a moment, Elena said nothing, her eyes scanning his face as if searching for any sign of insincerity. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. "Really, Dad?" Michael nodded. "Really? This is your home now for as long as you want it to be." Elena's lips pressed into a thin line and she looked down at her hands. "Thanks," she said simply, though Michael could see the flicker of emotion she was trying to hide. Miss Carter placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. "This is a big step, Elena. It's okay to feel a lot of things right now." Elena nodded but remained quiet. Michael knelt beside her, his tone gentle. "I know this doesn't fix everything, but I want you to know that you're not alone anymore. We'll figure this out together." She looked at him then, her expression softening ever so slightly. "Okay, Dad," she said. The transition to living together was not without its challenges. Michael quickly learned that parenting was a full-time commitment, one that extended far beyond providing food and shelter. Elena tested boundaries, sometimes deliberately, as if to see how far she could push before he gave up on her. But Michael remained steadfast, meeting her defiance with patience and understanding. One evening, Michael returned home from work to find Elena sprawled on the couch, her sketchbook open and pencils scattered across the coffee table. The dining room table, where she was supposed to be doing her homework, was conspicuously empty. "Homework done, sweetheart?" Michael asked, raising an eyebrow. Elena glanced up briefly before returning her focus to her sketchbook. "Almost, Dad." Michael walked over and picked up one of her pencils, twirling it between his fingers. "Almost, huh? You know, if you need help, all you have to do is ask." She shrugged. "I'm fine." "Elena," Michael said gently, sitting down across from her. "I'm not here to get on your case. But school's important, and I want to make sure you're giving it your best shot." Elena hesitated, her pencil hovering over the page. "It's just boring," she admitted. "I'd rather do this." She gestured to her sketchbook, where a detailed drawing of a futuristic building was taking shape. Michael studied the sketch, impressed as always by her talent. "It's amazing," he said sincerely. "But you know, even architects need math and science. It's all connected." Elena rolled her eyes but didn't argue. "Fine," she muttered, closing her sketchbook. "I'll finish my homework. That's all I ask," Michael said with a smile. As they settled into a routine, Michael made a conscious effort to create moments of connection. He attended Elena's school events, cheered her on at soccer games, and even joined her in painting her room a color of her choice. She picked a soft gray with accents of blue, transforming the space into a reflection of her personality. One Saturday, Michael surprised Elena with a day trip to a nearby city. They visited an architecture museum, where Elena's excitement was palpable. She moved through the exhibits with wide-eyed wonder, pointing out details in the models and blueprints that Michael would have overlooked. "This one's incredible," Elena said, stopping in front of a towering model of a modern skyscraper. "Look at how the lines all come together. It's so clean and perfect." Michael smiled, watching her with a sense of pride. "You could design something like that one day," he said. Elena glanced at him, her expression skeptical but hopeful. "You really think so, Dad?" "I know so," Michael replied firmly. Their bond deepened with each passing day, but it wasn't without setbacks. Elena still struggled with trust, and there were moments when her past experiences resurfaced, casting shadows over their progress. One evening, Michael found her sitting on the porch, staring out into the darkened yard. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, sitting down beside her. Elena shrugged. "Just thinking about Mom?" Michael nodded, letting the silence stretch before speaking. "What do you miss most about her?" Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. "She always believed in me. No matter what. She used to say I could do anything I set my mind to." Michael placed a hand on her shoulder. "She was right. And I believe in you too, Elena. You're going to do amazing things? For a long moment she said nothing. Then quietly she murmured, "Thanks, Dad." As the months passed, their life together began to feel less like an arrangement and more like a family. Elena's confidence grew both in her art and in herself. She started sharing more of her dreams with Michael, talking about college and the possibility of becoming an architect. Michael, in turn, opened up about his own life, sharing stories from his past and admitting his fears about being a good father. One evening, as they were cleaning up after dinner, Elena paused and looked at Michael. "You know, you're not just my dad," she said casually. "You're my family." Michael felt a lump rise in his throat. "And you're mine," he replied, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Thank you for letting me be part of your life, Elena." She smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that spoke volumes. "Thanks for not giving up on me." In that moment, Michael knew that their journey, though far from over, had been worth every challenge. Together they had built something strong and beautiful, a family forged through resilience and love. Whatever the future held, they were ready to face it, together. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel to support more powerful storytelling like this. And don't stop there. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next video. We'd also love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below to let us know how this story impacted you or what you'd like to see next. Your feedback helps us create meaningful content that connects with you. Thank you for being a part of our community. Your voice matters.